I, 26M, grew up in a small, sun-bleached southern town where church bells rang louder than reason and secrets were buried deeper than the cemetery on Miller's Hill. My parents were proud of their place in that world. We were the good Christian family, the ones who handed out devotionals on Halloween instead of candy, who hosted prayer circles in our living room and sent missionary money before paying off our own debts. It wasn't just a religion, it was their identity, their purpose, their lens through which they judged every friend, neighbor, and news headline. My father was a deacon and my mother ran the women's Bible study group. They weren't just religious, they were militant about it. Our home was a shrine to conservative values, framed scripture on the walls, a 10-foot cross in the front yard every Easter, and a marriage equals one man plus one woman bumper sticker permanently glued to the back of our minivan. They never outright said they hated gay people, but they didn't have to. Every sermon they praised, every political campaign they backed, every knowing glance they shared when two men kissed on the television, it was enough. I was their youngest son by 5 minutes. Nathan, my twin, beat me into the world and never let me forget it. He was everything they'd ever prayed for, strong, athletic, handsome in a clean-cut, straight-edged kind of way. By the time we were 10, Nathan was already a hometown legend. He was the star quarterback before his voice changed, could recite entire chapters of Romans by memory, and had a natural talent for telling grown-ups exactly what they wanted to hear. I drew pictures in the margins of my school books. I wrote stories about lonely nights in cursed forests and boys who kissed under silver moons, though I never showed those to anyone. I was small for my age, a little too quiet, a little too soft. I didn't know what I was yet, but I knew what I wasn't. I wasn't Nathan. I wasn't what they wanted. From as early as I can remember, I felt like a ghost in my own family. I tried, God, I tried. I sang in the church choir even though my voice cracked. I memorized psalms and played along with Nathan's football games in the backyard. But there was always this invisible wall between us, something I couldn't name but felt with every sideways glance my father gave me, every overly forced smile from my mother when I brought home a drawing instead of a trophy. Nathan didn't help. He was the golden boy and knew it. He liked to joke that I was the artsy twin, said it like it was an insult softened by a grin. He never hit me, never said anything overtly cruel, but he didn't have to. He laughed when our cousins teased me. He joined in when the youth pastor made the joke about boys with limp wrists. When I was 11 and asked Mom if boys could like other boys, Nathan overheard and told half the church by Sunday. I didn't ask questions like that again. By the time we were 13, we were living two entirely different lives in the same house. Nathan was planning to lead his youth group and date the pastor's daughter. I was counting down the days until I could leave and breathe air that didn't feel like it hated me. And then, a year later, everything changed. On a Tuesday afternoon I was 14 in spring, when they found the air thick with pollen and the threat of thunderclouds. I came home from school to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table, pale and stiff, clutching my iPod Touch like it was a live grenade. My father stood behind her with arms crossed, face unreadable, which was always worse than angry. Nathan sat silently on the couch in the living room, not looking at me. I knew. I knew before they said a word. They'd gone through my messages. I'd been texting a boy from school, not even anything explicit. Just late-night chats, the kind you send when you're tired and honest. I told him I liked him. That was it. No photos, no plans, no meetups. Just 4 words that sealed my fate: I think I'm gay. My mom's voice cracked as she read them aloud. Is this true? I didn't answer. My face burned, and I wanted to disappear. My dad didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just turned and walked out of the room. That was worse. That silence was worse than any slap, any sermon. For the next 2 days, they barely looked at me. Nathan wouldn't speak to me at all. On Friday night, they called a family meeting. I was told, not asked, that I would be attending a summer retreat. A spiritual renewal program in Georgia. My mom used the word healing. My dad called it a second chance. Nathan said nothing. I was too stunned to argue. Too ashamed to fight. They said it was for my own good. They said it was love. The place looked like any other summer camp: cabins, hiking trails, a chapel in the woods. But it didn't take long to realize this wasn't camp. This was correction. We weren't campers, we were cases. Cases to be handled. 30 of us, all boys, all there for the same reason: caught, confessed, or betrayed. We weren't allowed to speak freely. We were paired with accountability partners and monitored at all times. Our days started with forced prayer and ended with self-evaluation worksheets titled things like identifying the root of your temptation and replacing sinful desires with righteous goals. We had to stand up and share our journeys with the group, our thoughts, our fantasies, our supposed deviance. One boy, Evan, who was barely 13, cried during his first testimony. They made him start over. Every night, we were shown videos of ex-gays giving testimonies. Most of them looked hollow. Like they were reciting scripts through gritted teeth. Some of us whispered about them after lights out, said they didn't seem happy, that maybe they were pretending. We never said it too loud. The staff used shame like scripture. They'd say things like, "You are not broken because you are gay, you are broken because you have turned away from God." I didn't even believe in God by the third week, but I still cried myself to sleep most nights, silently, so the others wouldn't hear. There was one counselor, Mr. Langston, who took particular interest in me. He said I had artistic sensitivity and that God had bigger plans for someone like me. He'd keep me after group for one-on-one sessions where he'd ask invasive questions about what I thought about in bed, about the boys I liked. His voice never rose, but it made my skin crawl. We weren't allowed to leave our bunks at night. One boy tried. He was caught sneaking out to the staff cabin. We never saw him again. Rumor was, his parents pulled him early. Another rumor said he was sent to a more advanced facility. By the end of the 6 weeks, I'd learned exactly. I practiced my confessions. I even smiled when they gave me a certificate of completion. I remember looking at the gold embossed words and thinking, this is a lie. But I took it anyway. I told my parents it had worked. I told them I was better. And I was better at pretending. When we got home, I tucked that certificate in the back of my closet and didn't look at it again for years. But every time I caught myself staring too long at another boy, I heard Mr. Langston's voice in my head. Every time I laughed too loudly or moved too softly, I remembered my father's silence. Something had shifted. Something inside me had closed up like a locked room. And I didn't know if it would ever open again. The day we got back from camp, the house felt smaller. Not physically, it was still the same two-story house with the creaky stairs, the floral couches, the laminated prayer cards on the fridge. But something about it felt off. Like it had shifted an inch sideways in my absence. Or maybe I had. I didn't feel like I belonged in my own skin anymore, let alone my own home. My mom had made pot roast, like it was a celebration. My dad clapped me on the back and said, "Proud of you, son." Nathan gave me this weird half smile and mumbled, "Glad you're back." We sat down to dinner and prayed like nothing had happened. Like they hadn't sent me away. I complimented the food. I nodded when my dad talked about how strong I was to face that demon and defeat it. I was 13 and already fluent in lies. They thought I was cured. I let them think it. High school started 2 weeks later. I showed up with a new haircut, new clothes, ones my mom picked to look more masculine. I joined student council because it looked good on college applications, and because it gave me a script to follow. I dated a girl named Brittany for 6 months. She was kind, funny, and thankfully uninterested in kissing. I became an expert at masking. I laughed at homophobic jokes. I threw my voice deeper in gym class. I kept my eyes locked forward in the locker room. I was constantly calculating posture, pitch, eye contact. Every move I made was a defensive strategy. I wasn't living, I was performing. Nathan thrived. He made varsity football sophomore year. Was already getting attention from recruiters. He dated cheerleaders, went to youth leadership conferences, gave testimonies about protecting his purity. At home, my parents showed off his trophies and framed his school photos like museum pieces. Mine collected dust in a drawer. We barely spoke. Sometimes he'd glance at me during dinner, like he wanted to say something. Like maybe there was a version of him that wanted to reach across that chasm between us. But then my dad would mention politics or quote scripture, and Nathan would nod along like the perfect. It was late. I'd gone downstairs for water. Nathan was sitting in the dark, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. When I turned on the light, he didn't flinch. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't look up. Just said, you still think about it?" My chest tightened. "About what?" He shook his head. "Never mind." Then he got up and walked past me. I stood there for a long time after, wondering if he'd ever been honest about anything. Junior year was when the depression really set in. I stopped drawing. I deleted all my stories. I'd stare at my ceiling for hours, imagining what it would feel like to disappear, not to die, necessarily, but to just not exist anymore. To never have existed. Like I could undo myself back into the nothing I came from. But even then, I knew I couldn't give up. Not because I had hope, I didn't. But because I was stubborn. Because some part of me believed that if I could just make it out, just survive a little longer, there might be something better waiting. So I planned. I researched scholarships. I worked after school at a diner. I lied to my parents and said the money was for a mission trip. They were proud. Called me ambitious. I smiled and kept wiping tables. I made it through senior year by sheer willpower. By the time graduation rolled around, I'd been accepted to a college 4 states away. I remember standing in our backyard, diploma in hand, staring up at the stars and thinking, this is it. Quietly. I hugged my mother goodbye. My dad gave me a Bible with my name embossed in gold. Nathan drove me to the airport. He didn't say much, just fiddled with the radio the whole way. Right before I got out, he said, "Hope you find what you're looking for." I didn't reply. I just closed the door behind me and walked into the terminal. I didn't cry. Not then. But I remember stepping onto that plane and, for the first time in years, feeling a flicker of something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Freedom. The first thing I noticed when I got to college was the silence. Not the absence of noise. Dorms were loud in their own way, full of music and midnight laughter and the clatter of cheap dishes in shared kitchens. No, it was a different kind of silence. A silence without scrutiny. A silence that didn't press against my chest or wrap around my throat. For the first time, I could breathe without weighing every breath. My dorm roommate was a computer science major named Jordan who had purple hair and 3 nose rings. On day 1, he said, "I don't care who you sleep with or what weird shit you're into, just don't touch my ramen." I liked him instantly. Still, I didn't come out. Not yet. Freedom, as it turns out, is complicated when you've never had it before. I wasn't just learning how to navigate a new city or pick a major, I was learning how to exist outside the confines of performance. Every choice felt paralyzing. What music do I actually like? What clothes would I wear if I weren't afraid? What does it even mean to be me if I've only ever seen couples holding hands, boys in eyeliner, girls in suits? And I envied them, not just for their courage, but for their certainty. They looked like they knew who they were. I still felt like I was peeling off layers of a costume I didn't remember putting on. I kept my head down. Went to class. Worked part-time shelving books in the campus library. I was good at disappearing, years of practice. But some nights, the silence got too loud. There were times I'd sit in the corner of a party, sipping flat soda, watching people dance and flirt and laugh without consequence. I envied the messiness of it. I wanted to be allowed to make mistakes. To be awkward, to flirt badly, to figure it out like everyone else. But I didn't feel like I had permission. I didn't go to therapy, not yet. I didn't even think I needed it. I thought I was fine because I wasn't crying every night. Because I wasn't self-harming. Because I got up and went to class. Because I smiled and said I'm good when people asked. But I wasn't good. I was lonely in a way I didn't know how to name. Not just for connection, but for context, for someone who knew what I'd come from, who could look at me and understand why freedom still felt like a cage with invisible bars. I got through my first year with a 3.8 GPA and a notebook full of half-finished poems I never showed anyone. I volunteered at the LGBTQ+ center on campus, quietly, behind the scenes. I handed out pamphlets but never stayed for the meetings. I wasn't ready to be seen yet, not fully. It wasn't until sophomore year that I started bought jeans that actually fit. I started wearing rings. I joined a queer book club and actually spoke up during meetings. I kissed a boy, my first real kiss, behind the stacks at the library after a poetry reading. His name was Theo. We never dated, but he smiled like the sun and said, "You're allowed to be soft, you know." I cried after. Not because I was sad, but because I didn't know I could feel something so gentle. Junior year, I came out to Jordan. He blinked and said, "Cool. Wanna order Thai or Mexican tonight?" And that was that. Slowly, the shame began to loosen its grip. Not all at once. But enough. Enough that I could imagine a future that wasn't just about surviving, but about living. About building. By the time I graduated, I had 2 things I'd never had before, a degree. And a sense of self. I'd saved enough from campus jobs and freelance writing to get by for a few months. Chicago called to me like a promise, a city big enough to disappear in, but bold enough to find something new. When I stepped off the bus that summer, duffel bag in hand and nothing but a Google Doc full of apartment listings, I didn't know what I was walking into. But I knew, without a doubt, I was walking forward. Chicago in summer smells like promise and exhaust. I arrived with a duffel bag, 2 roommates I met on Reddit, and a part-time job at an independent bookstore that paid in late checks and employee discounts. Our apartment was tiny, a third-floor walk-up with cracked tile, radiators that screamed in winter, and every night when I locked the door behind me, I felt it, freedom. Not just in geography, but in essence. I was no longer under their roof. Their rules. Their scrutiny. I could breathe and stretch and speak without bracing for backlash. For the first time, I could build a life with my own hands. I ate what I wanted. I hung posters on the wall. I bought a second-hand denim jacket and ironed on patches from zines and queer artists. I started collecting little things that felt like me, enamel pins, worn books, dried flowers. My room wasn't just shelter, it was sanctuary. The bookstore was a mess, but it was a beautiful mess. The owner was a chain-smoking ex-poet named Elise who always smelled like lavender and nicotine. She let me reorganize the LGBTQ+ section and paid me under the table when payroll got tight. The regulars knew me by name. I started recommending books, slipping notes into certain pages, quotes that had saved me. It felt like I was giving people little pieces of my survival. Weekends became sacred. I'd walk the lakefront trail early in the mornings, earbuds in, letting the wind batter away whatever heaviness I still carried. I joined a local queer writing group. I went to trivia nights. I ate overpriced brunch with other 20-somethings who didn't flinch when I mentioned boys. It wasn't perfect. I still had nightmares sometimes. Woke up in a cold sweat remembering the camp, the shame, the prayers that felt more like chains. I still had trouble relaxing, letting my shoulders drop, believing that safety didn't have an expiration date. But I was healing. Not quickly. Late October, when I sat on the fire escape outside our kitchen. The air was crisp, the city buzzing softly below. I had a mug of tea in one hand and a short story I'd just finished drafting in the other. And for a single, breathless moment, I felt peace. Not joy, not relief, just a quiet sense that I was okay. That I might be okay tomorrow too. That's when I started writing about it, everything. Not just the camp, but the years before. The subtle cruelties. The way my mom used to close her eyes when I talked about art. The time my dad told me he'd rather have a son in prison than one in makeup. The way Nathan laughed when I cried after church one night and said, "It's just conviction." I wrote it all down. I didn't know if I'd ever share it. But putting it on the page felt like placing stones in a river, building something steady enough to stand on. Chicago gave me that. The distance, the stillness, the space to remember and forget at the same time. And for the first time in my life, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was becoming whole. Then one morning, I walked into a coffee shop, bleary-eyed and half awake, and ordered the wrong drink. The barista laughed, corrected it without charge, and handed me a cup with a smile that changed everything. His name was Chris. But that's a whole story on its own. The coffee shop was tucked into the corner of a busy street near the bookstore, the kind of place with mismatched chairs, half-dead ferns, and indie playlists that made you feel like you should be writing poetry even if all you were doing was answering emails. I wasn't a regular yet. Just someone who wandered in every so often, lured by the smell. I thought he looked like someone from a dream I'd forgotten too quickly. Not in a movie star way. He wasn't flashy. Just grounded. He had soft brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled, sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms, and a laugh that sounded like it had never been forced. I ordered the wrong drink. "I think you meant the chai," he said, eyes twinkling as he slid the correct cup toward me. "This is a death wish in a cup." I blinked. "Oh. Right. Yeah. I wasn't awake." He smiled, scribbled something on the lid, and handed it over. It wasn't until I sat down that I noticed what he'd written, "Next time, the chai's on me." I spent the rest of the day thinking about that smile. The next time I came in, he remembered my name. The third time, he asked me what I was reading. I told him, badly, nervously, about the queer fantasy novel I had tucked under my arm. He asked if it had dragons. I said yes. He grinned. "Cool. I'm more of a space opera guy, but I respect dragon culture." By the end of the week, I was making excuses to stop, and even when the kind of person who could get you to admit things without trying. I told him about the bookstore, the writing group, the cat I wanted to adopt. I told him little pieces of my past, not the whole thing, not yet, but enough that he understood there was history there. Pain. He never pressed. He just listened. He asked me out after 2 weeks. Said it as casually as if he were asking for a book recommendation. I panicked. Said I wasn't sure. He nodded, didn't take it personally. No pressure. Still friends, if you want. But I did want. It took me 3 more days to work up the courage. I came back after my shift, still in my bookstore apron, and said, "Okay. Yeah. Let's do it." He smiled so wide it made my chest ache. Our first date was at an open mic night. I read a poem. He clapped louder than anyone. Afterward, we shared fries in a diner and talked until they started sweeping under our table. We walked home under streetlights and didn't kiss until the second date. He asked if he could, I said yes. His lips were warm, gentle, patient. I almost cried. It's a strange thing, realizing that not all touch has to come with pain. That someone can look at you, really look, and not want to fix or hide or silence what they see. Chris didn't flinch when I told him about the camp. He didn't say "That's so sad" or "I can't imagine." He said, "I'm sorry you went through that. I'm glad you made it out." We didn't fall in love instantly. It wasn't fireworks. It was slow, steady, like water soaking into dry ground. A healing you don't notice until one day, the cracks don't feel so deep. We started building a life, piece by piece. Cooking dinners. Arguing about music. Falling asleep on the couch during movie marathons. We adopted Gerald, the grumpiest senior cat at the shelter. Chris gave him a voice and narrated his every imaginary complaint. When the city was quiet and the moonlight spilled through our window, I'd watch Chris sleep and wonder how someone like him had wandered into a life like mine. And every time, I'd come to the same conclusion. He didn't wander in. He was meant to be here. It had been almost 8 years since I'd last spoken to Nathan when he messaged me. I was sitting on the bookstore floor, restocking the poetry section, when my phone buzzed. A LinkedIn notification. Which, honestly, should have been the first red flag. Who uses LinkedIn to reconnect with their estranged twin brother? His profile picture hadn't changed much, just a cleaner haircut, a tie, a background blurred into something vaguely corporate. The message was short. "Hey. I'm in Chicago for work this week. Would be good to catch up. No pressure. Hope you're well." I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't heard from him since the day he dropped me off at the airport. No birthday texts. No congratulations when I graduated. No reaction when I came out publicly in a blog post the year before. I'd assumed we were done. Irreparably. But something about the message tugged at me. Curiosity? Loneliness? That stupid voice in my head that still wanted to believe family could come back different? I didn't tell Chris right away. Not because I wanted to hide it, I just didn't know what to say. I didn't even know if I'd respond. But I did. We agreed to meet for lunch on Thursday. Neutral ground, a cafe downtown. Public enough that it couldn't spiral, quiet enough that we could actually talk. I didn't expect much. I told myself it was just closure. He was already there when I arrived. Standing at a window seat, fidgeting with his glass of water. When he saw me, he smiled, and for a second, I saw the boy I used to share a room with. The one who used to sneak me extra cookies from the kitchen and fall asleep mid-sentence during late-night whisper. He looked tired. Older, somehow, than 30. Like someone who'd spent a decade holding his breath. "Hey," he said. "You look good." "You look the same," I replied. We sat. Talked. At first, it was awkward, like we were both reading from outdated scripts. But gradually, the walls lowered. He told me he'd gotten married. To a woman named Claire. They had a baby, a daughter. "Her name's Emma," he said, showing me a photo. "She's got mom's eyes. Poor kid." I didn't know what to say to that. Then he said it, soft, like he was afraid of scaring the words. "I'm sorry." I looked up. "For what?" "For everything," he said. "For how I treated you. For not standing up. For staying quiet. I knew what mom and dad were doing was wrong. I just didn't know how to stop it. And I didn't want to be next. I wanted to say so many things. That it wasn't enough. That silence is complicity. That he was the one person who could have made it bearable and chose not to. But all I said was, "Thanks." Because some part of me still wanted this to be real. Still wanted the brother I'd imagined when we were kids. He asked about my life, cautiously, like he didn't want to push too hard. I told him about Chicago. About the bookstore. About Chris. He hesitated, then said, "That's great. I'm happy for you." And for a moment, I believed him. We hugged goodbye. A stiff, awkward hug. But a hug. I walked home feeling light. Like maybe something had shifted. Maybe people could change. Maybe I didn't have to keep carrying all that weight alone. When I told Chris, he was quiet. I said, thoughtful, but I want to. Trust him? Chris nodded. He didn't say what he was thinking, but I could see it in his eyes, the concern, the doubt. The need to protect me even from my own hope. 2 weeks passed. Nathan texted a couple times. Memes. A photo of his daughter holding a juice box. Nothing heavy. Then, on a Sunday morning, I woke up to a knock at the door. Chris answered it. And I came out of the shower to find my parents sitting on our couch. At first, I thought I was dreaming. There was Chris, towel still over his shoulder, standing between the couch and the door like a bodyguard. And there they were, my parents, perched on the edge of the sofa like they were waiting to discuss dinner plans. My mother clutched her purse with both hands like it might protect her. My father sat stiffly, knees spread, hands resting on his thighs. His Bible sat in his lap. Open. "Sweetheart," my mom said the moment she saw me, her voice cracking. I didn't answer. I was still dripping from the shower, wrapped in a towel, heart pounding so hard I thought I might vomit. My mind was trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but everything felt sideways. Wrong. Unnatural. Like I had stepped into an alternate timeline where things didn't follow the same rules. Chris turned to me slowly. "They just showed up." Of course they did. I walked back to the bedroom and put on whatever clothes were closest. When I came back, they were still there. Chris stood by the wall, arms crossed. Silent, but coiled like a spring. I knew he was waiting for me to say the word. "We just want to talk." "Not yet." "About what?" I asked, my voice flat. She took a shaky breath. "We miss you. And we've been praying. God's put it on our hearts that it's time to bring our family back together." I laughed. I couldn't help it, a short, bitter sound that startled even me. "You kicked me out emotionally at 14, I said. "You erased me. And now you want to play reunion?" My dad spoke for the first time. "We didn't come to argue. We came to forgive." That word. Forgive. Like I had sinned against them. Like I was the one who needed saving. Chris stepped forward. "I think it's time for you to leave." My father looked him up and down. "You're the one who led him into this. You don't get to." "No," I cut in. "Stop." They both turned to me. "You don't get to come into my home and insult the one person who's ever actually loved me for who I am. You don't get to do this. Not anymore." My mom started crying. Like on cue. My dad's expression hardened. "God has mercy for all of us, son. Even now. It's not too late." Chris reached for his phone. "I'm calling the cops." They left before the dispatcher could pick up. The second the door closed, my legs gave out. Chris caught me before I hit the floor. I couldn't breathe. I didn't even realize I was crying until he pulled me into his chest and I felt how tightly I was gripping his shirt. We sat there on the floor for almost an hour. Not speaking. Just holding on. Just wanted to talk. Later that night, "You didn't have to escalate it." I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I blocked his number. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake listening to Gerald snore at the foot of the bed, watching the headlights from passing cars play across the ceiling, wondering if this would ever stop. If they would ever stop. Chris held my hand in the dark and whispered, "We're okay. I promise." And in that moment, I wanted so badly to believe him. But something in me had cracked open. And I could feel the storm still coming. For 2 weeks after the ambush, it was quiet. Too quiet. Chris and I went about our lives like people living in the eye of a storm, pretending the wind wasn't already howling in the distance. I went to work. He kept his shifts. We cooked dinner. Watched shows. Laughed a little. But everything felt tight. Like we were tiptoeing around a fault line, waiting for the next crack. I kept checking the peephole. I changed our locks. Chris offered to install a camera, but I said no. I wasn't ready to admit we needed surveillance to feel safe. I tried to write. I couldn't. I tried to read. My eyes skimmed paragraphs but nothing stuck. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted. I couldn't eat more than a few bites at a time. My therapist said I was dissociating. It was a Thursday. I was at work, reshelving a stack of used books in the memoir section when Elise, my boss, tapped my shoulder. Her face looked off. Pale. Unsure. "You need to check your email," she said. There was a message. Sent to our shared work inbox. No name. No signature. Just a subject line, "Concern regarding employee conduct." I clicked. Inside was a brief note accusing me of inappropriate behavior, radical sexual politics, and mental instability. Attached were two things. 1. A heavily edited screenshot of an old blog post I'd written in college about surviving conversion therapy, with half the context removed. 2. A photo of me from that camp, pale, scrawny, clearly miserable, sitting in a prayer circle. The email implied I was a danger to children. It claimed I was promoting deviance in a public business. It asked whether Elise was aware of the type of individual she was employing. I felt the ground drop out from under me. Elise sat with me in the back room, her voice low. "You're not in trouble. But I need to document this. Just in case. And you should probably talk to HR." I nodded. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight and dry. It felt like I was 14 again, like someone had ripped the floor out from under the life I'd built and I was falling through time. I went home early. Chris knew the second I walked in. He pulled me into his arms before I even took off my jacket. I cried, ugly, shaking, wordless crying. He didn't ask. He just held me, rocked me, let me fall apart. Checking my email that night, waiting for more. I barely slept. Nothing came. But the silence felt worse than noise. Because now I knew, they knew how to find me. And they knew how to hurt me without ever showing their faces. The next morning, Elise sent me a message. Short. Reassuring. "We stand by you. Let me know what you need." I cried again. But something else happened, too. I got angry. Not just sad. Not just scared. Angry. Because I had done everything right. I had built a life from ashes. I had survived the unspeakable and turned it into something good. And they, the people who were supposed to protect me, were still trying to destroy it. That weekend, I started looking at apartments in other cities. Seattle. Portland. Maybe even Montreal. Somewhere far. Somewhere clean. Somewhere I wouldn't have to flinch every time a knock came at the door. But no matter where we went, I knew one thing for certain. I would not let them take my peace again. Not this time. The panic attack hit me in the middle of a grocery store. We were in the frozen section. Chris was asking whether I wanted veggie dumplings or chicken pot stickers. I didn't answer, because suddenly, I couldn't. My chest went tight. Not metaphorically. Physically. As if an invisible hand had wrapped around my lungs and started to squeeze. My vision tunneled. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed louder than they should have. My knees buckled, and I barely caught myself on the freezer handle. Hey! Look at me. I couldn't. My heart was racing, slamming into my ribcage like it was trying to escape. My hands shook. My teeth chattered. It felt like I was drowning on dry land. He guided me to the floor, kneeling next to me, one arm wrapped tightly around my back. "Breathe with me, okay? In. Out." People walked by. Some stared. I couldn't have cared less. Tears streamed down my face and I couldn't stop them. It wasn't sadness. It was fear. It was everything. It was 14 years old and trapped in a camp. It was sitting across from a father who called your love a sin. It was standing in your own apartment while your abusers played house on your couch. It was too many things, all at once, and my body couldn't hold them anymore. Chris never let go. Not once. He talked me through it. Took me home. Made tea. Wrapped me in a blanket. Gerald climbed into my lap and purred like a tiny, grumpy therapist. "I think we need to talk to someone," Chris said gently, later that night. I nodded. I didn't argue. I'd seen therapists before. Campus ones. Free clinic ones. But this time, I found someone who specialized in trauma. A queer man who understood what I meant when I said the word conversion without having to explain. I told him everything. Piece by piece. Like emptying a box I'd carried for so long, I'd forgotten what was inside. There were memories I hadn't looked at in years. Conversations I didn't know had left bruises. I cried in his office more than I ever had in my life. Sometimes I said nothing at all. Just sat there while he held space for sat beside me. Held my hand. Listened as I told the therapist how helpless I'd felt the day my parents showed up. How it had turned our home into a place I no longer felt safe. "I just want to feel normal," I said. My therapist shook his head, kindly. "You don't need to be normal. You just need to feel safe. And whole." Safe. That word lodged in my chest like a splinter. Because I didn't know what safety actually felt like. I'd spent so much of my life waiting, for the next slight, the next sermon, the next slap of shame. I wasn't used to softness. To people staying. To being believed. But slowly, achingly slowly, that began to change. I took time off work. Elise covered for me without question. Chris and I redecorated the apartment. Nothing drastic. Just little things, new plants, a painting I'd been too scared to hang before, a string of lights on the bookshelf that made our living room feel like a cafe. It felt like reclaiming the space. I journaled. I drew again. Badly, but it felt good to move my hands without expectation. I stopped checking the peephole. Stopped rereading the email. Stopped refreshing old memories like they were news alerts. The fear didn't vanish. But it loosened. I still flinched when I heard my dad's voice in my dreams. Still caught myself bracing when I saw a number I didn't recognize on my phone. That mattered more than anything. We decided to move in late February. It wasn't a dramatic conversation. There were no fights, no ultimatums, no tearful confessions. Just 2 mugs of tea between us, snow falling outside the window, and the kind of silence that feels like an agreement before the words even arrive. Chris said, "I don't think we have to keep proving we can survive here." I nodded. Chicago had been everything. A rebirth. A reckoning. But it had also become a place full of ghosts. Of glances over shoulders and locked doors. Of trauma trying to live next to healing. We wanted somewhere softer. Somewhere far enough to feel new, but close enough to still carry the pieces of who we'd become. After weeks of searching and budgeting and lists with pro/con columns, we settled on Portland. It felt like the right kind of weird. The kind of place where queer bookstores still survived, and people said community garden without irony. We sold most of our furniture, packed the rest in a rented van, and drove across the country in 4 days. It felt like shedding skin. Every mile that passed beneath our tires felt like an inch between us and everything we'd outgrown. I watched skylines give way to mountains, strip malls fade into pine forests, and felt myself on a quiet street. 1 bedroom, lots of light, windows that looked out onto trees instead of buildings. It smelled like cedar and opportunity. We bought a used couch and painted the walls soft green. I found a new bookstore to work in, this one owned by 2 married women with matching tattoos and a shop cat named Marcel. Chris found a job at a local cafe and started taking improv classes at night. Gerald adjusted quickly. He found a sunspot by the window and claimed it like royalty. We started walking more. Eating slower. Talking about the future in terms that didn't feel like they were wrapped in if or unless. I applied to a low-residency MFA program. Chris started a podcast about queer joy. We made friends. We hosted board game nights. We planted herbs on the windowsill and laughed when the basil refused to grow straight. I didn't tell anyone where we'd gone. Not my parents. Not Nathan. Not anyone who could carry that information back to them. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about control. About choosing who had access to me. About deciding that I didn't owe anyone my location, my story, or my healing. We weren't running. We were arriving. And it was slow, and quiet, and ordinary in all the ways I used to think were boring, but now craved like water. Every now and then, I'd wake up from a dream about my old house. About the camp. About sitting in a chair across from my father while he told me I was broken. I'd lie awake and stare at the ceiling, waiting for the feeling to pass. It always did. Eventually, it always did. Some nights, I'd tell Chris I felt haunted by things I couldn't name. That the past was still clinging to the edges of my lungs like dust. He'd take my hand and say, "That's okay." Not perfectly, we'll breathe it out together, but always together. Grief is a strange thing when the person you're grieving is still alive. Some mornings, I'd be sipping coffee by the window, sunlight catching on the rim of my mug, and I'd think of my mother's hands, the way she used to braid my hair before church, fingers gentle, methodical. Other times, I'd hear a sports commentator on TV and be hit with a flash of Nathan's voice yelling at the screen, our teenage bedroom separated only by a wall too thin for privacy. They're still out there. Still attending the same church. Still handing out casseroles to neighbors. Still praying for my soul. I wonder sometimes if they believe those prayers are helping me. If they imagine I'm living in sin but thinking of them every day, aching with regret, ready to come home. They don't know that I've built a new home. They don't know the smell of our kitchen when Chris bakes bread. They don't know the little smile I get when Gerald meows for breakfast 20 minutes too early. They don't know the warmth of a chosen family, or the soft, steady joy that comes with safety. But grief lingers. Not because I want them back, not really. But because something inside me still mourns the version of them I needed. The version I pretended they were. The fantasy parents I made up in my head when I was little. The ones who would have cheered when I came out, Who would have told me my softness was strength, not sin? That version never existed. And forgiving them, truly forgiving them, means accepting. It isn't forgetting. It isn't inviting someone back into your life just because they share your DNA. Forgiveness, for me, is about setting down the weight. About saying, you don't get to control me anymore. About moving forward without dragging their shame behind me like a shadow. I don't forgive them because they asked for it. I forgive them because I refuse to keep bleeding from a wound they won't acknowledge. Nathan sent a letter once. About a year after we moved. It was handwritten, long, full of confused empathy and half apologies. He said he still loved me. Said he hoped one day Emma could meet Uncle Eli. I never replied. I still haven't thrown it away. Chris asked if I wanted to. I said, not yet. And that's where I am now. Somewhere between scars and sunlight. Between then and now. Between who I was, and who I'm still becoming. I write more these days. Not always about trauma. Sometimes just about trees. Or strangers. Or a cat that lives on the edge of the universe and steals stars for fun. I've started sending stories out again. One got published in a local zine last month. It was about a boy who ran away and found a house where no one asked him to change. Chris framed the first page and hung it by the door. We still talk about the future. Not in fantasies, but in blueprints. We talk about buying a house. Adopting a dog. Maybe even fostering teenagers one day, the kind of kids who've been told too many times that love comes with conditions. I want to show them something else. Something true. Because I know now that family isn't who you're born to. It's who stays. Who listens. Who helps you build something when all you've ever known is rubble. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.